Karoline Leavitt wasn't just another name in the world of politics or media. She was someone who had worked hard to get where she was, and her story was far from ordinary. At just 26 years old, she had already carved out a reputation for herself as a no-nonsense voice in conservative circles. Unlike many others in the spotlight, Karoline didn't come from a family of politicians or wealthy donors. She grew up in a modest household where values like honesty, hard work, and standing up for what's right were drilled into her from an early age. Her journey started when she decided to pursue a career in public service. After graduating with a degree in political science, she landed a job as a press secretary for a well-known Republican congressman. It wasn't glamorous work, long hours, endless emails, and constant pressure, but it taught her something invaluable: how to communicate clearly and effectively. She quickly realized that being able to break down complicated issues into simple terms was a rare skill, and one that could make a real difference. What set Karoline apart was her boldness. She wasn't afraid to ask tough questions or challenge ideas, even if they came from people with more experience or authority. This trait earned her respect among colleagues and viewers alike. Over time, she began appearing on TV shows and podcasts, sharing her thoughts on everything from policy debates to cultural trends. Her sharp insights and relatable delivery made her a favorite among audiences looking for authenticity in a sea of talking heads. One evening, after wrapping up a busy day of interviews, Karoline found herself scrolling through social media. Like most nights, she was keeping an eye on what was happening in the news. That's when she stumbled upon a clip from a popular MSNBC show hosted by Maddow. The segment caught her attention because it dealt with a topic close to her: heart, election integrity. As someone who believed deeply in the importance of fair elections, Karoline leaned in to listen closely. Maddow, known for her confident demeanor and extensive knowledge, was discussing voter fraud statistics. In a calm, matter-of-fact tone, she stated, "Independent studies have shown that voter fraud occurs in less than 0.001% of all ballots cast." On the surface, this sounded like a solid, authoritative claim. But something about it struck Karoline as off. Maybe it was the precision of the number or the way it was presented without much context. Whatever it was, it nagged at her enough to dig deeper. Later that night, instead of winding down, Karoline opened her laptop and started researching. She figured it wouldn't take long to confirm whether the statistic held water. After all, credible data should be easy to find, right? But as she sifted through reports, studies, and articles, she discovered something alarming. There was no independent study backing up the exact figure Maddow had cited. Not one. It seemed too specific to be pulled out of thin air. So Karoline kept digging. Eventually, she traced the number back to its source, a blog post written by a partisan activist. Even worse, the original article focused on a tiny geographic area, not nationwide elections. The context had been completely distorted to fit a narrative. For Karoline, this wasn't just sloppy journalism. It felt intentional. Someone with Maddow's resources and team should have known better. And yet, here she was, repeating misinformation to millions of viewers. The more Karoline thought about it, the angrier she became. Misinformation wasn't harmless. It shaped how people thought, influenced their decisions, and sometimes even divided communities. If someone like Maddow could get away with spreading falsehoods, what hope was there for holding anyone accountable? Karoline knew she couldn't let this slide. She might not have the same platform as Maddow, but she had something equally powerful: the truth. With determination bubbling inside her, Karoline decided to act. She didn't care about the risks or potential backlash. All that mattered was setting the record straight. Little did she know, her decision would lead to one of the most explosive moments in cable news history and change the course of her life forever. The next morning, Karoline woke up with a clear sense of purpose. She had spent hours the night before gathering evidence to disprove Maddow's claim, but now she needed a plan. How could she ensure her findings reached as many people as possible? More importantly, how could she present them in a way that was both compelling and impossible to ignore? She started by organizing everything she had uncovered. First, there was the debunked blog post, the supposed source of the statistic Maddow had cited. It wasn't written by an expert or published in any reputable journal. It was just a piece penned by someone with an obvious political agenda. Second, there were actual studies on voter fraud, none of which supported the 0.001% figure. Some reports suggested higher rates in certain areas, while others pointed out flaws in detection methods. The bottom line was simple. The number Maddow used didn't exist in credible research. Karoline knew facts alone wouldn't be enough. To make her case stick, she needed visuals, charts, graphs, and direct quotes from experts who specialized in election integrity. So she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Using publicly available data, she created easy-to-understand graphics that illustrated the discrepancies between what Maddow said and reality. For instance, one chart compared the fabricated statistic to real-world examples of documented voter fraud cases. Another highlighted how often misleading numbers like these were repeated without proper verification. But preparing the material wasn't the hardest part. It was deciding where and how to share it. Going directly to MSNBC felt pointless. They weren't likely to admit their mistake unless forced to. Posting on social media would help spread awareness, but Karoline wanted something bigger. She wanted to confront Maddow head-on, in front of an audience large enough to force accountability. That meant booking a spot on a competing network, one with a platform big enough to amplify her message. Her team reached out to several conservative talk shows, pitching the idea of a segment dedicated to exposing the falsehood. At first, some producers hesitated. Taking on someone as influential as Rachel Maddow carried risks, especially for a relatively new commentator like Karoline. But once they saw the depth of her research and the passion behind her argument, they agreed. Within days, she secured a slot on a popular evening program known for its lively debates and high viewership. As the day of the appearance approached, Karoline rehearsed tirelessly. She practiced explaining complex points in simple terms, ensuring even casual viewers could follow along. She anticipated counter-arguments, ready to shut them down with logic and evidence. And she reminded herself why she was doing this, not for fame or clicks, but because it was the right thing to do. Holding powerful figures accountable mattered, especially when those figures shaped public opinion every single night. Finally, the day arrived. Karoline dressed professionally but comfortably, wanting to look confident without coming across as overly polished. As she waited backstage, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This was her moment to shine, to prove that truth still had power in a world increasingly clouded by spin and misinformation. When the host introduced her, she walked onto the set with a calm smile, knowing exactly what she had to say. Last night, she began, leaning slightly forward to emphasize her point. Rachel Maddow told millions of viewers that voter fraud is virtually non-existent, citing a statistic that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. I'm here today to show you why that claim is not only false but dangerously misleading. The room fell silent as Karoline launched into her presentation. She started by breaking down the original statement, pointing out how specific and authoritative it sounded. Then step by step she unraveled the lie. She showed the clip of Maddow making the claim, then contrasted it with the actual sources, or lack thereof, that supposedly supported it. She displayed her charts and graphs, walking viewers through each one patiently. Every time she presented a new piece of evidence, the host nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by her preparation. One of the most powerful moments came when Karoline quoted an expert in election security. "Here's what a leading researcher in this field actually said," she explained, reading aloud from a peer-reviewed study. "While voter fraud is rare, claiming it doesn't exist at all is equally misleading." She paused for effect, letting the words sink in. So we have two extremes, exaggerating the problem or denying it altogether. Neither helps us address the real issues facing our elections. By the time she finished, the audience was buzzing. Calls and texts flooded in from friends and colleagues, watching live, congratulating her on a job well done. Social media lit up almost instantly, with clips of her takedown spreading across platforms. People praised her poise, her thoroughness, and her courage. Even critics of her political views admitted she had made a strong case. For Karoline, though, the best part wasn't the praise. It was knowing she had done her part to push back against misinformation. She hadn't attacked Rachel Maddow personally. Instead, she focused on the facts, leaving little room for debate. Her goal wasn't to score points but to remind everyone of the importance of honesty in journalism. As the segment ended and the cameras cut away, Karoline took a deep breath. She knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. MSNBC wasn't going to back down quietly. But she was ready. If anything, this experience had strengthened her resolve. She had taken a stand, and the response proved she wasn't alone. Thousands of people cared about the truth, and they were counting on voices like hers to keep fighting for it. The moment Karoline's segment aired, the internet exploded. Clips of her calmly dismantling Rachel Maddow's claim spread like wildfire across social media platforms. People were sharing, commenting, and debating her points with a level of enthusiasm usually reserved for viral memes or celebrity scandals. It wasn't just conservatives who were talking. Moderates, independents, and even some liberals joined the conversation. For once, everyone seemed to agree on one thing. Karoline had made a compelling case, but not everyone was thrilled. MSNBC, predictably, didn't take kindly to being called out. Within hours, the network issued a vague statement defending Maddow's segment. They claimed that while the specific statistic might have been misinterpreted, the broader point about election security remained valid. The wording was careful, almost lawyer-like, avoiding any direct admission of wrongdoing. To anyone paying attention, it was clear they were trying to downplay the issue, rather than address it head-on. Karoline saw right through their response. She knew what they were doing, dodging accountability by deflecting attention to a different topic. But instead of firing back immediately, she decided to let the public handle it. By now, people were scrutinizing MSNBC's statement as closely as they had scrutinized Maddow's original claim. Critics pointed out the glaring lack of an apology or correction. Others mocked the phrase broader point, arguing that accuracy mattered more than generalities. Even neutral observers admitted that the network's evasive tactics only made them look worse. Meanwhile, Karoline found herself in the middle of a media storm. Requests for interviews poured in from outlets across the political spectrum. Conservative networks hailed her as a hero, inviting her onto shows to discuss her takedown further. Neutral programs asked her to explain her research in detail, giving her a chance to reach audiences who might not normally tune into partisan content. And, though liberal-leaning platforms were less enthusiastic, they couldn't ignore the buzz surrounding her appearance. Some invited her on to defend her position, knowing their viewers would demand answers. Through it all, Karoline stayed composed. She declined some offers, focusing instead on opportunities where she felt she could make the biggest impact. When she did appear, she stuck to the same approach that had worked so well during her initial takedown: facts over emotions, clarity over drama. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the heated rhetoric often seen in these types of debates, earning her respect even from those who disagreed with her politics. One particularly memorable interview took place on a morning talk show, known for its lively panel discussions. The host introduced her as the woman who fact-checked Rachel Maddow, which drew cheers from the audience. From the start, Karoline emphasized that her goal wasn't to attack anyone personally. "This isn't about Rachel Maddow or MSNBC," she said firmly. "It's about holding journalists accountable when they spread misinformation. If we don't do that, then who will?" Her comment struck a chord with many viewers, sparking conversations about trust in media. Some callers expressed frustration with what they saw as biased reporting, while others admitted they hadn't realized how easy it was for false information to slip through the cracks. A few even thanked Karoline for inspiring them to start questioning claims they heard on TV, regardless of the source. These moments reminded her why she had chosen this path: to empower people to think critically and demand better. Of course, not everyone was supportive. Predictably, some critics accused her of grandstanding or playing politics. They argued that she was using the controversy to boost her own profile, ignoring the countless hours she'd spent researching and preparing. Others dismissed her findings altogether, claiming she was cherry-picking data to suit her narrative, a charge she found ironic, given the circumstances. But Karoline refused to engage with negativity. Instead, she focused on the overwhelming support she received from ordinary people who appreciated her efforts. As the days turned into weeks, the impact of her actions became undeniable. Viewers began demanding higher standards from their favorite news programs, flooding social media accounts and email inboxes with calls for accountability. Some networks responded by revamping their fact-checking processes, introducing stricter guidelines to prevent similar incidents in the future. While change wouldn't happen overnight, Karoline's confrontation had planted a seed, one that would continue to grow as more people joined the push for transparency. For Karoline, the experience reinforced her belief in the power of truth. She had faced criticism, skepticism, and outright hostility, but none of it shook her resolve. If anything, it strengthened her commitment to speaking up, even when it was uncomfortable. She understood that taking a stand came with risks, but she also knew the alternative. Staying silent was far worse. In quieter moments, she reflected on how far she'd come since those late nights spent researching voter fraud statistics. What started as a gut feeling had turned into a nationwide conversation about integrity in journalism. And while she was proud of what she had accomplished, she knew there was still work to be done. Misinformation wasn't going away anytime soon, and someone needed to keep fighting against it. So, Karoline kept moving forward. She used her growing platform to advocate for greater accountability, whether through interviews, articles, or public appearances. She partnered with educational organizations to teach people how to evaluate sources and spot falsehoods, believing that knowledge was the best weapon against misinformation. And she continued to challenge powerful voices, unafraid, to call out hypocrisy wherever she saw it. By the time the dust settled, Karoline's life had changed forever. She was no longer just a press secretary turned commentator. She was a symbol of courage and determination. Her story served as a reminder that one person could make a difference, if they were willing to speak up and stick to their principles. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she was ready to face whatever came next. After all, she had already proven that the truth was worth fighting for. As the weeks went on, Karoline's life became a whirlwind of activity. The viral moment that started with her takedown of Rachel Maddow had snowballed into something much bigger than she ever anticipated. Suddenly, she wasn't just another voice in the crowded world of political commentary. She was a public figure, someone people looked to for clarity and honesty. And while the attention brought opportunities, it also came with challenges. One of the first things Karoline noticed was how many people reached out to her personally. Some were fellow journalists or commentators who wanted advice on handling tough topics without compromising their integrity. Others were everyday citizens, teachers, nurses, small business owners, who simply wanted to thank her for standing up against misinformation. Many shared stories about how they'd lost faith in the media over the years, but felt inspired again after watching her segment. These messages meant the world to Karoline. They reminded her why she had taken the risk in the first place, to give people hope that truth still mattered. But not all the feedback was positive. Alongside the praise came criticism, from predictable corners of the internet and beyond. Some accused her of being overly dramatic, saying she was blowing the issue out of proportion. Others claimed she was playing politics, using the controversy to gain fame or further her career. At first, these comments stung. Karoline knew none of those accusations were true. She hadn't set out to become famous or stir up drama. But as the days passed, she learned to let the negativity roll off her back. She realized that if you stood for something, there would always be people ready to tear you down. And that didn't mean you were wrong. What surprised her most, though, was the reaction from within the journalism community itself. While some colleagues avoided discussing the incident altogether, others privately admitted that what Maddow had done was sloppy at best and unethical at worst. A few even confided in Karoline that they admired her courage. Most of us wouldn't have the guts to call out someone like Rachel, one veteran reporter told her during a candid phone call. You've raised the bar for accountability. whether people want to admit it or not. This newfound respect opened doors for Karoline in unexpected ways. Invitations to speak at conferences and universities began rolling in. She found herself addressing crowds of students eager to learn how to navigate the complex landscape of modern media. During these talks, she emphasized the importance of fact-checking, critical thinking, and humility. "No one has all the answers," she often said, "but we can all commit to asking better questions." Her message resonated deeply, especially with younger generations hungry for guidance in an era of information overload. At the same time, Karoline made a conscious effort to use her growing platform responsibly. She launched a podcast where she discussed current events with guests from diverse backgrounds, including experts, activists, and ordinary citizens affected by policy decisions. Unlike many shows designed purely for entertainment value, hers focused on fostering respectful dialogue. She encouraged listeners to consider different perspectives, even when they disagreed, and to prioritize evidence over emotion. The show quickly gained traction, earning rave reviews for its thoughtful approach. She also partnered with educational organizations to tackle the root causes of misinformation. Together, they created workshops and online resources aimed at teaching people how to evaluate sources, spot red flags, and engage in constructive conversations. One initiative, called Fact First, targeted high school students, equipping them with tools to sift through the noise and find credible information. Karoline traveled across the country to promote the program, meeting teachers and parents who expressed gratitude for giving kids the skills they needed to navigate today's chaotic media environment. Despite her busy schedule, Karoline never lost sight of what truly mattered: staying grounded. Fame could be intoxicating, but she refused to let it change her. She kept her circle small, relying on close friends and family for support and perspective. When asked about her sudden rise to prominence, she always gave credit to the values instilled in her from a young age. "I'm not special because I spoke up," she'd say. "I'm just someone who believes in doing the right thing, even when it's hard." Her humility only added to her appeal. People admired her not just for her intelligence or sharp wit, but for her authenticity. She didn't pretend to have all the answers or try to act superior to those who disagreed with her. Instead, she approached every conversation with genuine curiosity and openness, a rare quality in a world increasingly divided along ideological lines. By this point, MSNBC's initial response to the controversy had faded into the background, replaced by broader discussions about media ethics and accountability. Some critics argued that the network should have issued a formal correction or apology, pointing out that transparency was key to rebuilding trust. Others suggested that incidents like this highlighted the need for stricter oversight in journalism. Whatever the case, one thing was clear: the ripple effects of Karoline's actions were far-reaching. For her part, Karoline chose not to dwell on MSNBC's handling of the situation. She had already said her piece, presenting the facts in a way that left little room for debate. Now her focus was on the future, on creating a culture where truth and accountability took center stage. She understood that systemic change wouldn't happen overnight, but she believed progress was possible if enough people committed to it. Looking back, Karoline couldn't help but marvel at how much her life had changed in such a short time. What started as a quiet evening spent researching voter fraud statistics had turned into a national movement for greater transparency and integrity. It was overwhelming at times, but also deeply fulfilling. She had proven to herself and to countless others that standing up for what's right wasn't just worthwhile, it was essential. And yet, as satisfying as the past few months had been, Karoline knew this was only the beginning. The fight against misinformation was ongoing, requiring constant vigilance and effort. But she was ready. With each new challenge, she grew stronger, more determined, and more hopeful. After all, she had seen firsthand the power of speaking truth to power and the impact it could have on the world. As the months rolled on, Karoline's influence continued to grow. The ripple effects of her confrontation with Rachel Maddow had spread far beyond the initial controversy, sparking conversations that touched nearly every corner of society. People weren't just talking about voter fraud statistics or media accountability anymore. They were discussing something bigger, the role of truth in a world increasingly shaped by half-truths and spin. One of the most surprising developments was how her actions inspired others to take a stand. Teachers began incorporating lessons on media literacy into their classrooms, using Karoline's story as an example of why critical thinking mattered. Journalists started holding themselves, and each other, to higher standards, double-checking sources and admitting mistakes when they occurred. Even casual viewers who might not have thought twice about fact-checking claims before found themselves questioning what they saw on TV or read online. It wasn't just about one statistic or one network. It was about creating a culture where honesty was valued above sensationalism. But change didn't come without resistance. Not everyone welcomed this shift toward accountability. Some networks doubled down on their refusal to acknowledge errors, while others dismissed calls for transparency as attacks on free speech. Critics accused figures like Karoline of being divisive, claiming that challenging powerful voices only deepened societal divides. To them, the solution wasn't more scrutiny, it was less criticism. Karoline understood these arguments, even if she disagreed with them. She knew that calling out misinformation could feel confrontational, especially in a climate where people often viewed issues through partisan lenses. But she also believed that avoiding tough conversations did more harm than good. "If we don't hold each other accountable," she said during an interview, "then we're letting fear dictate our choices instead of courage." Her words struck a chord, resonating with audiences tired of seeing important topics swept under the rug. Despite the pushback, there were moments when Karoline felt hopeful about the direction things were heading. One such moment came during a panel discussion at a major journalism conference. The event brought together reporters, editors, and academics from across the political spectrum to talk about trust in media. At first, tensions ran high. Participants clashed over everything from bias to clickbait headlines. But eventually, a consensus emerged. No matter where you stood politically, accuracy mattered. During her turn to speak, Karoline shared her perspective on why accountability was so crucial. "We all make mistakes," she said, addressing the room. "What sets us apart is how we handle them. Do we ignore them, or do we own up and try to do better?" Her tone was measured but firm, inviting listeners to reflect rather than react defensively. By the end of the session, several attendees approached her privately to express gratitude for her candor. One editor even promised to implement stricter fact-checking protocols at his publication. A small victory, but a meaningful one. Back home, Karoline poured her energy into expanding her podcast and educational initiatives. The show had become a safe space for nuanced discussions, tackling complex topics without resorting to shouting matches or oversimplifications. Each episode featured guests with diverse viewpoints, from grassroots activists to policy experts, ensuring listeners heard multiple sides of every story. Audience feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with many praising the respectful tone and depth of analysis. "I never thought I'd enjoy listening to debates," one listener wrote in an email, "but your show makes me want to learn more." Meanwhile, the Fact First program gained traction in schools nationwide. Teachers reported noticeable improvements in students' ability to evaluate sources and spot misleading information. Kids who once accepted viral posts at face value now asked questions like, "Who wrote this?" and "What evidence supports their claim?" Parents thanked Karoline for giving their children tools to navigate the digital age confidently. For her, these stories were proof that education could drive real change, one classroom at a time. Still, the journey wasn't without its challenges. As her profile grew, so did the pressure to maintain her principles. Every appearance, every article, every tweet was scrutinized, not just by supporters but by critics eager to find fault. Some accused her of hypocrisy, pointing to minor inconsistencies in past statements as proof she wasn't perfect. Others tried to paint her as overly ambitious, suggesting her advocacy work was motivated by personal gain rather than genuine concern. These attacks weighed on her, especially when they came from unexpected places. Yet, Karoline refused to let negativity derail her mission. Instead, she leaned on her support system, family, friends, and colleagues who reminded her why she started this fight in the first place. They celebrated her wins, big and small, and encouraged her to keep going when setbacks threatened to overwhelm her. Their unwavering belief in her kept her grounded, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this battle. One particularly trying week underscored the importance of resilience. A late-night comedian mocked her on national television, portraying her as a self-righteous crusader obsessed with nitpicking details. Social media lit up with memes and snarky comments, turning what should have been a quiet evening into a barrage of notifications. At first, Karoline laughed it off, brushing aside the jokes as harmless fun. But as the ridicule persisted, she began to question whether speaking out was worth the cost. That's when her younger brother called. He had always been her biggest cheerleader, cheering her on from the sidelines. "Remember why you're doing this," he said simply. "You're not fighting for likes or applause, you're fighting for something bigger than yourself." His words hit home, pulling her back from the brink of doubt. The next morning, she woke up determined to push forward, refusing to let cynicism dim her resolve. By the end of the year, Karoline's impact was undeniable. Conversations about media integrity had entered the mainstream, with organizations adopting new guidelines to combat misinformation. Viewers demanded transparency, holding outlets accountable for errors and omissions. While progress was slow, it was steady, and that gave Karoline hope. Reflecting on everything she'd been through, she realized how much she had grown. The shy, unsure young woman who once doubted her ability to make a difference had transformed into a confident advocate for truth. She still faced obstacles, still encountered resistance, but she no longer feared standing up for what she believed in. If anything, the challenges had strengthened her conviction that the fight for honesty was worth every struggle. As she looked ahead to the future, Karoline knew there would be more battles to fight. Misinformation wouldn't disappear overnight, and holding powerful voices accountable would always require courage. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Thousands of people, from seasoned journalists to curious teenagers, were joining the movement, united by a shared commitment to truth. Together, they were proving that even in uncertain times, integrity could light the way forward. As the months turned into years, Karoline's journey evolved in ways she never could have predicted. What began as a single moment of courage on live TV had transformed into something much larger, a movement driven by everyday people who believed in the power of truth. It wasn't just about calling out Rachel Maddow anymore. It was about creating a world where accountability was the norm, not the exception. One of the most profound changes Karoline noticed was how her work inspired others to take action in their own lives. She started receiving messages from teachers, parents, and community leaders who were using her story as a catalyst for change. A middle school teacher wrote to tell her that after hearing her speak at an education summit, he revamped his curriculum to include lessons on media literacy. "The kids are eating it up," he said. "They're asking questions I never thought they'd ask at this age." Another message came from a librarian in a small town who organized workshops to teach seniors how to spot fake news online. These stories filled Karoline with pride, knowing that her efforts were reaching corners of society she hadn't even imagined. But inspiration wasn't limited to classrooms or libraries. Journalists, too, found themselves rethinking their approach to storytelling because of Karoline's example. Some reporters reached out to thank her for reminding them why they got into the profession in the first place, to seek and share the truth. Others admitted they had grown complacent over time, letting deadlines and pressure cloud their judgment. Hearing Karoline's unwavering commitment to accuracy reignited their passion for honest reporting. One investigative journalist told her, "You made me realize we can't afford to cut corners, not when so much is at stake." Even within MSNBC, subtle shifts began to emerge. While the network never publicly acknowledged the controversy surrounding Rachel Maddow's segment, insiders whispered about new fact-checking protocols being implemented behind the scenes. Editors became more cautious about citing statistics, insisting on multiple credible sources before airing claims. Viewership patterns suggested that audiences were growing savvier, demanding transparency rather than accepting statements at face value. Though no one credited Karoline directly, it was clear her takedown had left its mark. Despite these positive developments, the road ahead wasn't easy. Karoline faced constant challenges, both personal and professional. As her platform expanded, so did the scrutiny. Critics continued to attack her motives, accusing her of grandstanding or playing politics. Some trolls took aim at her appearance or personal life, trying to distract from the substance of her arguments. At times, the negativity felt suffocating, making her question whether the cost of speaking out was worth it. During one particularly rough patch, Karoline decided to step back and recharge. She spent a weekend at her family's cabin, far away from cameras and social media. Sitting by the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on everything she had achieved and everything she still hoped to accomplish. Her brother joined her, bringing along a guitar and a cooler full of snacks. They laughed, sang silly songs, and talked late into the night. For the first time in weeks, Karoline felt lighter, reminded of the simple joys that fueled her fight. When she returned to work, she approached things differently. Instead of letting criticism consume her, she focused on the impact she was having. Every email from a grateful listener, every teacher implementing her resources, every journalist striving for better standards, that was what mattered. The noise would always be there, but she learned to tune it out, focusing instead on the signal, the real, tangible difference she was making. Her renewed energy showed in everything she did. On her podcast, she tackled even tougher topics, inviting guests who challenged her views and pushed her to think deeper. During one episode, she debated a liberal academic about election reform, finding common ground despite their ideological differences. Listeners praised the exchange, calling it a model for respectful discourse in polarized times. In another episode, she interviewed a former fact-checker who revealed the inner workings of major newsrooms, shedding light on how misinformation sometimes slipped through the cracks. These conversations kept her audience engaged while reinforcing the importance of thoughtful dialogue. Meanwhile, her educational initiatives gained momentum. The Fact First program expanded beyond schools, partnering with community centers and libraries to reach underserved populations. Karoline traveled across the country, hosting workshops and speaking at town halls. She met people from all walks of life, factory workers, retirees, college students, all eager to learn how to navigate the complex information landscape. Their enthusiasm energized her, reminding her that the fight for truth transcended politics or demographics. As her influence grew, so did opportunities to shape policy. Lawmakers invited her to testify before committees exploring ways to combat misinformation. Tech companies consulted her on designing algorithms that prioritized credible content over sensationalism. Nonprofits sought her guidance on creating campaigns to promote media literacy. Each invitation reinforced the idea that her voice mattered, not just as a commentator, but as a leader advocating for systemic change. Through it all, Karoline remained humble. She knew she wasn't perfect and didn't pretend otherwise. When mistakes happened, as they inevitably did, she owned up to them, quickly and openly. This transparency only strengthened her credibility, earning her respect from allies and opponents alike. People admired her willingness to admit fault, seeing it as proof that she practiced what she preached. By now, Karoline's legacy extended far beyond the initial controversy. She had become a symbol of integrity in an era defined by uncertainty. Her name appeared in articles, textbooks, and documentaries about modern journalism. Students wrote essays about her courage. Activists cited her as an inspiration. Even critics begrudgingly acknowledged her impact, admitting that she had forced important conversations about accountability and trust. Looking back, Karoline marveled at how far she'd come. From a young press secretary navigating the chaos of Capitol Hill to a national figure leading a movement for truth, her journey was anything but predictable. There had been moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion, but also moments of triumph, connection, and hope. Through it all, she stayed true to herself, guided by the belief that honesty was worth fighting for. And yet, As proud as she was of what she'd accomplished, Karoline knew the work wasn't finished. Misinformation remained a formidable foe, adapting to new technologies and platforms faster than anyone could keep up. But she refused to let that discourage her. If anything, it motivated her to keep pushing forward, to keep challenging the status quo, to keep standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, because in the end, that's what defined her. Legacy, not perfection, but persistence, not fame, but faith in the power of truth, and not just words, but actions that inspired others to join the fight. As long as there were people willing to demand better, from their leaders, their media, and themselves, Karoline knew the future held promise, and she intended to be part of it every step of the way. Years later, when Karoline sat down to reflect on her journey, she realized how much everything had changed, not just for her, but for the world around her. The ripple effects of that one moment, calling out Rachel Maddow's misleading statistic, had grown into waves, touching lives in ways she never imagined. It wasn't just about holding a powerful journalist accountable anymore. It was about sparking a cultural shift toward honesty and integrity. One of the most rewarding aspects of her journey was seeing how many people had taken up the torch. Teachers across the country continued to use her story as a lesson in critical thinking, showing students that standing up for truth didn't require fame or resources. It required courage. Journalists who once dismissed accountability as optional now embraced it as essential, knowing their audiences demanded nothing less. Even ordinary citizens began fact-checking claims they encountered online, refusing to accept information at face value. These small acts of resistance added up, creating a groundswell of change that felt unstoppable. For Karoline, the personal growth she experienced was equally profound. She had started this journey unsure of herself, questioning whether anyone would listen to someone without decades of experience or a massive platform. But over time, she learned that authenticity mattered more than credentials. People weren't drawn to her because she was perfect. They were drawn to her because she was real. Her willingness to admit mistakes, ask tough questions, and stay grounded resonated deeply, reminding others that everyone has a role to play in defending the truth. Her podcast remained a cornerstone of her work, evolving into a space where nuanced conversations thrived. Each episode brought fresh perspectives, challenging listeners to think critically and empathetically. One memorable guest was a former social media executive who revealed how algorithms prioritized sensational content over factual reporting. Another was a psychologist who explained why humans are naturally drawn to misinformation and how to combat those instincts. These discussions didn't just educate, they empowered people to take action in their own lives. Meanwhile, the Fact First initiative became a national model for media literacy education. Schools adopted its curriculum, libraries hosted workshops, and community groups organized events to spread awareness. Karoline traveled extensively, meeting teachers, parents, and students eager to learn how to navigate the digital age. Everywhere she went, she heard stories of transformation. A high schooler who debunked a viral rumor in her class, a retiree who taught his grandchildren how to spot fake news, a librarian who turned her town into a hub for media literacy. These moments reminded her that change happened not through grand gestures, but through countless small ones. Of course, challenges still arose. Misinformation adapted quickly, finding new ways to exploit technology and human psychology. Deepfakes, AI-generated content, and manipulated images made it harder than ever to discern fact from fiction. Critics argued that fighting such a pervasive problem was futile, suggesting that efforts like Karoline's were drops in an endless ocean. But she refused to give in to despair. Instead, she doubled down on innovation, partnering with tech experts to develop tools that flagged false information and promoted credible sources. Progress might be slow, but it was steady, and that gave her hope. As her influence grew, so did the pressure to stay true to her values. Fame brought temptations to soften her stance, to chase clicks, to prioritize profit over principle. But Karoline resisted them all. She surrounded herself with people who kept her grounded, family members who reminded her of her roots, friends who celebrated her wins and consoled her during losses. and mentors who guided her through tough decisions. Their support anchored her, ensuring she never lost sight of why she started this fight in the first place. Looking back, Karoline often thought about the night she first uncovered Maddow's misleading claim. If someone had told her then what lay ahead, the viral clips, the interviews, the movement she'd helped spark, she wouldn't have believed it. Back then, she was just a young woman trying to do the right thing, driven by a gut feeling that the truth mattered. Now she was a leader, an advocate, a symbol of resilience. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, she remained the same person at her core, curious, determined, and unafraid to speak up. Her legacy wasn't defined by any single achievement, but by the collective impact of her actions. She had proven that one person could make a difference, not by being extraordinary, but by being persistent, by choosing courage over comfort, honesty over spin, and accountability over apathy. She inspired others to do the same. And while the battle against misinformation would continue long after she was gone, she took solace in knowing she had helped lay the foundation for a better future. In quieter moments, Karoline allowed herself to dream about what lay ahead. She imagined a world where truth wasn't a battleground but a shared value, a world where journalists reported responsibly, politicians spoke honestly, and citizens engaged thoughtfully. It was an ambitious vision, perhaps even idealistic, but she believed it was possible. After all, if a young woman with no connections or fortune could ignite a movement for truth, then anything was achievable. So she kept moving forward, one step at a time. Whether hosting her podcast, speaking at conferences, or mentoring the next generation of leaders, she approached every task with the same determination that had carried her this far. Challenges would come, setbacks would happen, and critics would always find something to say. But none of that mattered, not when there was work to be done, because for Karoline, the fight for truth wasn't just a career or a cause. It was a calling. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard, she knew the future held promise. Her journey had been unpredictable, messy, and often exhausting, but it had also been deeply fulfilling. Through it all, she had stayed true to herself, proving that the simplest act of courage, speaking the truth, could change the world. And so, with renewed purpose, Karoline walked into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. Ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she had already shown the world that the hardest battles were worth fighting. For her, that was enough.